Hi, Misha here, and kind of continuing on in my look at either beta canon or head canon ships, whatever you like, or just bullshitting for a little while about Star Trek ships. Now we're going to look at the fleet after Wolf 359 and kind of running through the Dominion War period. So, very late 2360s through the mid 2370s, and there's quite a large range of ships here. And these are ones that are more common and that you can find in various video games and what have you. And with that, we'll jump in with one that is barely a starship. The Danube-class runabout. Really have to mention it because these do have names and registry numbers. And they're right on that line, as you know, between starship and long-range shuttle. They're about 23 meters in length. Have a standard comfortable crew of 4, although they can easily be operated by 2. And they can carry up to 40 people in an emergency for a relatively short duration. They're just really 1 deck, or maybe 1.5 decks if you want to be pedantic. They are capable of warp, sustained warp at 4 to 5, and capable of higher warp for short bursts. They come standard with phaser arrays, although if you need a photon torpedo launcher, a module can be added up top to give you a micro one. And we see them being used plenty in Deep Space Nine as independent scout survey type starships. But ultimately, what makes me consider them ships is that they have their own registry and names versus just a shuttlecraft with the name of its parent ship. That said, these are usually attached to star bases or, well, deep space installations, planets, or large starships, like we see one on the USS Enterprise. Yeah, just kind of right in that range. They're inexpensive to produce. There's a lot of bang for your buck with these. And they're pretty tough little ships, all things considered. And relatively modern. These came into service around 2368, give or take. So a year or two after Wolf 359. And in a video game setting, this could be a short-range defense craft, light defense of installations. Also a scout craft, or in some instances a support craft, again, especially because it does have this module that can be swapped out on top for various things. But I just felt like we had to mention the runabout. It's so important to the Deep Space Nine series, and we even see once or twice in Voyager and Next Generation. Speaking of Deep Space Nine, next up we have the USS Defiant of the Defiant class. Of course, most of you know what this is. Federation's first warship. It's relatively small at about 120 meters. Has a relatively light crew at between 40 and 50. Only 4 jet decks. It has a perfectly adequate warp drive. It's capable of cruising at least warp 7 and has a max speed of over warp 9. But its main thing, of course, is combat and durability. Although, since the Federation doesn't like to be seen making warships, this was labeled as a light escort. It also would be considered in a video game, say, like a destroyer type. It has these compact nacelles. Kind of a very different look for Starfleet ship. but a neat one and very iconic. And it still has a saucer as such. And of course, this front area is a deflector control area. It has pulse phasers as well as phaser arrays. It does carry photon torpedoes, but more famously, it's known for being one of the first ships to carry quantum torpedoes. And it has 4 launchers total in front and 2 in the aft. It has, of course, strong shielding and ablative hull armor, and really was a test bed for technology that would be seen in a more developed form in the upcoming ships. The Federation would build multiple Defiant classes, I should say, but it wasn't a perfected design as such. It had shortcomings. It was a little too powerful for its own good and a little too focused on one role. And of course, the design work really began before Wolf 359 and it was kicked into high gear after. But then this was put into mothballs when they felt that the Borg were no longer a threat. So this really didn't go into active service until around 2370, even though it had been kind of hanging out for a couple of years. But again, even then, it wasn't without its issues. It was a little too much of a compromise design. And again, the Federation wasn't well versed in warships at the time. Kind of reminds me of a Federation bird of prey. It's about that size. And of course, we even see the Defiant with a cloaking device. But I mean, if you have any kind of combat-oriented video game, you're going to have the Defiant in it. This would be a very good value ship for the cost. Tough and with a good punch, but still, nevertheless, quite small. And probably a bit of a cannon fodder ship. So yeah, something in the destroyer type range. And before getting this little model, this is one of the ships that I really didn't have a clear idea in my head with what it looked like. A friend had let me see his model of the Defiant back in the day, so I had an idea, but that was just a loner and didn't really have a lot of time to super study it, if it were. So, yeah. But that kind of kicked off this whole new generation of starships. Next up, I have the USS Equinox of the Nova class, and is very clearly stated in the Voyager episode, Equinox. This is a science planetary survey ship, and it very much fits into the new design aesthetic, along with the Sovereign and whatnot. However, since the Voyager crew is aware of the ship class and type, we know that it was launched before the Intrepids, and based on the registry number as well. So this would have been something launched in the late 2360s. It's kind of a replacement for an Oberth or maybe a Miranda. Just more of a science ship, but since it did survive, it's obviously capable enough. But it is that trend in Starfleet towards smaller designs. This is about 220 meters long, has a crew of roughly 80. It does have phasers and photon torpedoes, but it's not a combat ship. It is a science and has good sensors and whatnot. Has a reasonably high max warp, but nothing like that of Voyager. So maybe around 9 to 9.5. Pretty good size nacelles for its intended size. It does have what appear to be 2 shuttle bays in the back, but I think one of them is actually supposed to be the impulse manifold. Not sure. And it has a recessed bridge, which is interesting. The actual model was started off as one of the concepts for the Defiant, even though it wasn't used. The idea was kind of kept around and revived for Voyager. So if it has a little more of an aggressive look than you might expect for a science ship, that's kind of why. But I'm glad they used it. This is just a popular design amongst a lot of fans. It also begins the hull having a secondary in the front here deflector, kind of a backup deflector. And its primary deflector kind of reminds me of the Voyager or TNG style a bit. But yeah, in a video game setting, this would definitely be a science ship or deep space scout. You could probably get away with that, but it's certainly not a combat ship as such. But again, I would say, since it survived 5 years in the Delta Quadrant, it's probably tougher than an Oberth. I can't imagine an Oberth making it. So it's more balanced than maybe previous science ships. And it's just a cool looking design that I think a lot of Star Trek fans are into. I also noticed that Eaglemoss is now doing an XL version of this. I probably won't pick it up, but it's cool that they did. But yeah, the Nova class, the Equinox. And it's a shame we didn't see more of these in the series over the years. But it's nice to know that the Federation still has quote-unquote science ships kicking about, because it's kind of their original purpose. Next up, we have the Steamrunner-class. Certainly an interesting looking design. It does kind of fit in. It too has the cutout in the front, which we could attribute to a secondary deflector, with the main one down here kind of slung below. This is the first of the First Contact fleet ships. Very interesting design. Yeah, very interesting. And in universe, this is considered a heavy frigate. It is a patrol craft. Maybe a bit of a policing craft. It's said to not have especially strong phasers, but it has very good phaser coverage, 360-degree arcs. It's also said to have at least 2 photon torpedo launchers with very deep magazine wells, so a good bit of firepower there. It's about 370 meters long and has a crew of roughly 200. Keep in mind, a lot of the length is kind of this wasted space with your nacelles and deflector hanging out back here. This would almost have to be an automated deflector system, because getting personnel, I mean, I guess you could have a tube running alongside the nacelle and down the pylon, but yeah, it's a little unusual, I'm not gonna lie. But I like it though. It's a weird one. It said that, you know, since this was a policing craft or patrol craft, that it could have also had a secondary role of troop transport or cargo transport. And I think that kind of, yeah, I could see that. Why the whole saucer is all one big chunk. Seems like it would have some pretty good cargo abilities based on its size and relatively small crew. It could be a candidate for Miranda replacement too, with the big saucer and nacelles kind of slung down. Again, it's weird, it's different. It's probably not 100% practical because of where the deflector and engineering hull being detached, but damn it, it is cool looking. And the Eaglemoss model is actually a very good size and pretty much all metal. This whole here, even I think part of the nacelles are metal. So cool. This is certainly one I really didn't know what it looked like, because I never had models of the First Contact fleet. In Star Trek Armada, this is used as an artillery ship. I could see that based on its odd look and large cut, but I'd probably use it for, like I said, more of a troop transport or patrol ship, kind of a long range. She's not super fast, around warp 9.6. You know, just a solid, dependable ship that doesn't cost an arm and a leg to build, and that can be called upon for multiple unique roles. But yeah, it was only one of many in the new First Contact fleet. Next up in our First Contact or Anti-Borg fleet, we've got the Saber-class, Saber type. And this is actually the first of two USS Yeagers we've got here too. And it has the deflector slung down, much like the Steamrunner, and then the nacelles integrated at the front to the, it's not really a saucer section anymore, I don't know, boomerang section. But of course the connections are all very different. We still have this front cut out. It's very clear that these are from the same design period, introduced right at the end of the 2360s and still being built in the 2370s. Some beta canon says that this was kind of an alternative to the Defiant plan. Little less radical, a little more conservative. Size-wise, it's a little bit bigger, at about 190 meters all told, although it's kind of more stretched out. Has about the same crew of 40 to 50. Has 6 decks instead of 4, like the Defiant, but of course part of that's like smaller decks, the way things are hung down. It's a little bit faster than a Steamrunner at about warp 9.7. And forward facing, it actually has very good weapons coverage, reasonably powerful phasers, photon launchers. It has a shuttle bay up here, relatively small of course, but at the back it's pretty lightly defended. No photon launcher and very minimal phaser. Now this is something meant to be maneuverable, fast on the impulse, and the attack from the front. Some kind of Federation propaganda would put this as a science ship. I mean, I guess it could be used as that, probably could, but it's very clearly a combat ship and about the same role as the Defiant. You could either classify it as a light cruiser or an escort ship, kind of in the destroyer role. In the old Armada game, kind of had it right. It was classified as kind of right in line with the Defiant. A little less firepower, but a little larger, a little more flexible, probably a little bit more science able to go on. Slightly larger shuttle bay, so a little more multi-purpose than a Defiant class, but still very much a cruiser type for attacking in waves and wings. And it just looks fast and sleek. Again, has that flying wing aesthetic going on, which is neat. And I think it fits in really well with the Steamrunner. So in a game setting, this could be an early, relatively cheap and easy to spam ship. But I like it. It's neat. Again, it could go in for Federation Bird of Prey, because it's about that kind of same size and crew as well. But yeah, I don't buy that it's primarily a science ship. Nope, not buying it. Next up, we have possibly the rarest one, the Norway class. And this is rare because we didn't really see these in the Dominion War, not through any particular reason, except for the CGI model, for different reasons, claims was not usable in Deep Space Nine, so they simply didn't use it. Some say it was too low res, some say it was corrupted. A shame, because it too is very much fitting in with the same type of fleet. Again, we have these interesting kind of wings in the back, with our nacelles kind of slung down, although they're still technically above the saucer, or scoop. Got a back section here. It too has the small cutout at the front of the saucer that we have seen all of these. It's said to be about the same length as a Steamrunner, about 365 meters, a crew of about 200. Some unique features of this one: it has a new compact warp core, still capable of about warp 9.7. Just overall compact and well-defended design, very, very thin. But its big deal is, instead of having phaser strips the old-fashioned way, it has 6 to 9 phaser cannons, or pulse cannons, so kind of the same tech as we saw pioneered on the Defiant. And of course it has at least 2 photon launchers as well. It's a shame that the ship wasn't seen more. It's definitely a creative enough design, but I guess it is maybe the least imaginative. But I still like it quite a bit. So in a game setting, this would clearly be a gunboat, an artillery boat, because of the phaser cannons. So probably a tough ship with ability to do some pretty good phaser damage. And take a beating. And considering how low res that the original CGI models were in the 1990s, this is probably about as good as it ever looked when Eagle Moss did them. And wrapping up our supporting first contact fleet, we have a lot of people's favorite, the Akira. Now, the Steamrunner and the Norway were considered light cruisers. This is considered a medium cruiser, and it too is kind of in the running for a potential Miranda replacement. And it's an interesting configuration and a little bit different of a design take. Has more of a traditional saucer. It's actually said that this maybe went into service a year or two before the others. Slung down nacelles. It's about 500 meters long with a crew of roughly 500, so quite a bit bigger. This pod in the back is considered to be modular. We see it here with a weapons pod, but it's said that a sensor pod can be on. It's also said that it has 2 smaller shuttle bays in the back with 1 larger shuttle bay in the front, and the 3 bays are actually connected so the shuttles can fly in and out using the same network. The bridge is relatively protected because of these pontoon structures. And there's some crazy sources out there that say these have 15 or even 20 photon bays. But then it says it only has like 150 photon torpedoes or something, which is not, I don't think it would have that. I think it definitely has quite a few photon launchers, but, even half a dozen would be plenty considering how we see these used in First Contact and other shows. So we'll just say it has a large stockpile of photon torpedoes, plus has a good way to use shuttles. This would certainly be a torpedo boat, a missile cruiser, if you want to go larger scale in a game, so long range, accurate fire, and then its ability to support large shuttles or even fighter operations would surely be handy as well, so kind of a secondary role there. So in a combat setting, this would be a medium-class battleship or battle cruiser. It has about the same warp as the rest, 9.7, maybe 9.8. And it's said in peacetime it can use its shuttle bay system for rapid deployment of rescue vehicles or resupply vehicles. And again, a lot of beta canon says it kind of was born out of the ashes of the Cardassian border wars when the Federation kind of saw that it didn't have any really dedicated combat craft, and while that was fine for Cardassians, what if the Romulans came back, or the Klingons changed their mind, or the Borg, of course, came. And again, the Akira class is just a fan favorite and a cool design. And as I said in the Enterprise video, some claim that this is virtually the same as the Enterprise in X-01. While I agree they have a very clear connection, I think they're different enough, but you may probably disagree. But it's a neat ship, and from a background ship in First Contact, it's really become a fan favorite and saw quite a bit of use in the Dominion War, and has also appeared in Voyager a handful of times. So it's kind of gotten around. They've gotten their mileage out of this CG model. And now it's time for the Intrepid class, the Voyager. If you don't know this ship, well, yeah, anyway. But it does fit into the lineage quite well. We've got the secondary deflector in the front here. We've got the newer, sleek saucer. One interesting thing is the bridge is pushed a little further back. Therefore, while it's exposed, is maybe a little better protected. Of course, its big deal, little gimmick, were the moving warp nacelle pylons and its TARDIS-like shuttle bay. And it's clearly a pretty good size shuttle bay. Even has a small landing strip in the back. But yeah, getting into the Voyager consistencies is not worth it here and now. Overall, this is about 344 meters. And depending on how many people Janeway is killed this day, has a crew between about 150 and 120. I think realistically at the beginning of the Voyager episode, it has a crew of 141, but it is maybe a little lightly manned because it was sent out a little bit premature to rescue Tuvok. But so it's a reasonable sized ship, kind of in that verge between light cruiser and medium cruiser. I'm going to say more light cruiser though, based on the relatively small crew. And it's kind of long, so it's not going to have just a super amount of space. But it is 15 decks. At different times it's said to be a science ship and a combat ship, depending on different things of Voyager. Which, yeah, just kind of sets it right in that medium multi-role purpose starship, frankly. It's designed for long duration voyages. It has neural circuitry for faster processing. It has quite powerful phasers. Still has just photon torpedoes, not quantums, but it does have 2 forward-facing torpedo bays and 2 rear-facing. So, yeah, reasonably well appointed. Uses traditional phaser strips. Its main deal is very fast and maneuverable. Maximum speed of warp 9.975. And is just kind of the modern take. We see this getting ready to launch around 2370 and service by 2371. And we do see a few different members of this class, not just Voyager. There's also the USS Bellerophon. So we do know that it was produced in some numbers. And yeah, it could be a good support ship, you know, a light battleship, a pocket battleship, if you will, want to go to old school terminology. So I think the old Armada game had it placed kind of correctly, you know, decent amount of punch. I would also give it credit for being very durable. I guess its main aspects would be its durability and speed. And so ability to hang into a fight for a bit, but also get out. Yeah, it's the Voyager. You know it. We saw it for 7 seasons. Inconsistencies aside, it is a cool looking design. At least I think so. What do you think? I think it fits really well into the Starfleet. And it would have its own kind of design lineage. Kill me. let me try that again. One night, some designers were told they needed to make a new ship, and they got drunk and they fucked off at work. And then in the morning, they realized, oh crap, we need to do something. So they got some glue and some broken model parts and came up with this. I'm sure that's exactly how that happened, right? Okay, fine. The Yeager type, or Yeager class. I told you we had the Saber type Yeager earlier. Now we've got the Yeager type Yeager. And oh, what a ship this is. And I'm one of the people that actually likes it, so yeah. But I mean, good God. This is a kit bash. I'll give it that. A true one. You've got an Intrepid saucer in partial neck and warp nacelles onto and a blown up Condor or Maquis Raider thing. Yeah, it just doesn't work. I mean, the two are different sizes. But either way, this is what it is. This is kind of a product of the Dominion War, a background ship. I'll give it this. It's a unique profile for a Federation ship. You can't deny that. I guess it's a good thing it has the secondary deflector on the saucer, because now it's the primary, because there's nothing there. Unless there's a tiny little deflector there, but I don't think so. This is classed as a light cruiser. It's about 400 meters long because of the 6th section on the back. It's just a little bit longer than a regular Intrepid. It's got a slightly larger crew of about 200. And in universe, a lot of beta canon says this was built cheap and ready to go for the war. That I can believe. And is kind of a planetary or station defense ship. And rapid response to diminished units that have suffered losses in the war. Of course, since it has the Intrepid type saucer, it has phaser strips. It's also said to have a phaser cannon like a Norway, at least one of them. And it has 2 rear-facing photon launchers and 1 forward-facing, which is a little unusual. Because of it not having the full Intrepid type warp system, it's said to be a little slower, around warp 9.5, maybe 9.6. On the other hand, because it has these giant impulse engines by scale, it's maybe a little faster at pure impulse than some others. I mean, it's just a straight unabashed kit bash. And it's a love it or hate it, and most people hate it. I think it's just so ugly and stupid, it's cool. But that's just me. It's certainly one that I'm glad Eagle Moss did. In a video game setting, what would this be? I would say if you had a bunch of junk ships floating in space, and you had a repair ship go out and took them all and put them together and made something work out of it, yeah, you'd have something like this. I just have a hard time imagining a shipyard would just build something like this. This really does seem like something cobbled together. I don't know. It seems like something that would just be kind of put it there, a cannon fodder ship, a little more durable than maybe some others, but not especially fast or heavily armed. Again, cannon fodder, we don't have anything else. Let's send in a Yeager class. I definitely think he was better served, Chuck Yeager, that is, by the Saber. This is a thing to name after someone. I'll give it that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's a thing. So we go from the flying scrapyard of the fleet to the pride of the fleet in the early 2370s, and really running through the next couple of decades, the Sovereign-class USS Enterprise. And in theory, we know that more were made, but in practice, we really only see this because they wanted to keep it something special for the Next Generation movies. But again, theoretically, we knew that these were used in the Dominion War. They'd almost have to be, because this is designed for warfare. This is considered a heavy cruiser, or even a battleship as such. And it's the biggest one we've seen today at 685 meters long, a crew of over 700, closer to 8. And this is built kind of using me dropping it. And that's why I do it on a carpet. This is built using all the new technologies. From the Defiant, it has a blade of hull armor and quantum torpedoes. From the Intrepid, it has the new neural circuitry And from the Yeager, it has thankfully nothing. It is extremely fast, capable of even higher speeds than the Intrepid, over 9.98. It has the ability for long-range missions. It has a very well-appointed warp-capable captain's yacht. It has photon and quantum torpedoes. It has a very large shuttle bay, at least 2 of them, one on the saucer, one on the star drive. It has 2 medical centers, 2 sick bays. It's just, the creme de la creme of the fleet. And it's designed for exploration and diplomacy, but also for combat. It's so basically learning from all the lessons learned from the Galaxy class. This is absolutely not a glass cannon. In every film we see it in, it gets the crap kicked out of it and still keeps on going. And this is kind of the final member of the first contact fleet, if you will, the Sector 001. And I get why some people aren't a huge fan of it. It's definitely built in the model itself to look good on screen, on a movie screen. And in a video game setting, this would be, your ultimate battleship, but it would also be very expensive, both in terms of resources and crew. So you probably wouldn't want to have an entire fleet of these, unless you could afford it. And no goofy Corbinite devices, thank you and very much there. So from the Yeager type to this. And it well fits in with like the Intrepid, the Nova, the Akira, and the rest. And was the kind of baddest thing going in the Starfleet during the Dominion War. And since the Dominion War was, a war, they needed hospital ships, medical ships. This is the USS Pasteur, the Olympic class. Now we see this in All Good Things, which is a potential future. But based on its registry, it seems to date quite a few years back. And based on a little bit of screen information and dialogue from Deep Space Nine, we know that this class was in service. In fact, the USS Nobel was a medical ship used in the war. So I decided to bring it out because it's cool. Just when you think the spherical design is finally done and over with, one will come back. And the up front here is kind of for your crew and medical areas. And then our large star drive, in addition to being engines and stuff, we have a very large shuttle bay, which when you're doing rescue missions or medical missions, you can understand why you would need to be able to rapidly deploy and recover larger medical type shuttles. So this could be triage and first aid and just a large shuttle bay in the back. I think the design actually works really well as a medical frigate. That's kind of what I would rate it as, something like a frigate. It's about 320 meters. We don't really know the crew. It's relatively fast. We know that based on the speed, which again, medical ship. Just like you kind of want an ambulance to be able to go over 50 miles per hour. You'd probably want a medical ship to do that. And it does have shielding and phasers, but they're really just for preliminary defense. This is very, very far from a combat ship, and it shows. But it's a neat design. In the real world, it's also unique because it was designed external just to the Star Trek design team. So that's, I think, why it looks a little different, but it still fits in. The nacelles still look like Starfleet nacelles. And again, there's definitely a place for a medical ship, a hospital ship in the fleet, and that's something that the real world has had for a very long time too. So in a game environment, this would be, I'd say, your repair ship. an evacuation ship, or a medical ship if a game environment allows for any kind of medical mechanic. That's a medical mechanic. There we go. So I decided to bring it out as a very cool, unique support ship. And if you had it in a game, it would definitely stand out for what it is. And now we come to our last one. The flying or spacing brick. The Federation, the Starfleet tug. This would be the salvage vehicle that would eventually give us the Yeager. I don't know, I just felt like bringing this out real quick. This is what makes Eagle Moss cool. Who else would think to do a block and actually do a very good job of it? It's a good size, very heavy. And this was just another kind of thrown together kit bash with a bit of transformer and, I don't know, girders put on. It has warp nacelles, actually kind of flipped around inside out Romulan to Deridex. And then the top, the hab module here is a repurposed runabout pod. In universe, this is about 90 meters long, although it's almost as tall. Only has a crew of 6 because, again, it's just a tugboat, basically. It's capable of warp 6, which is slow but then you have to consider it's actually grasping onto another ship to haul it back. Now, typically it would use its powerful tractor emitters back here. It only has the arms for manipulating space debris, maybe breaking pieces off of a ship like nacelles if they were wrecked, or, a star drive if it's in danger of going critical. And I guess in an emergency it probably could physically lock on to a ship and pull it, but it's probably not preferred. And then in the front we have this other module, which I guess is its deflector. That would make sense. You'd probably want a pretty powerful deflector for something like this. I don't think it's armed. If it is, it might have like navigational phasers, but that's about it. But these would be sent out to clean up a battlefield after it was over, which again makes a lot of sense to have a salvage vehicle. And in a game environment, this would be relatively inexpensive little units you could send out from, say, a starbase to salvage materials, metals, maybe do some rescue missions. It'd make a lot of sense to have something like this in a game. And it's just cool and kind of adds to the real world feeling of the fleet, to have a service craft like this. I think so, at least. And it doesn't look attractive because it's not meant to. This is a tugboat. And with that, we kind of come to the end of this little roundup. So even though this is a relatively brief period of around a decade in Star Trek, because of late TNG, the movies, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, it's well appointed with different ship models. And this is also the era when CGI is starting to come into vogue. So while some were practical models like the Defiant, a lot of these were just computer generated, which gave them the ability to get away from kit bashing as much and into real world designs. And of course, next time I think you'll have an idea of what we're going to. We're going to even skip forward into the Nemesis era and beyond. But for today, I thought this would be enough. So as always, what do you think of my kind of positioning of these ships, what I think they're good for in the fleet, used for, and which one is your favorite? And a lot of people go for the Akira, and while I really like it, it's probably not my favorite. I don't know, I'd have a hard time deciding, frankly. I really like the Nova. I have a soft spot for the Saber. And then I always kind of feel bad that the Norway gets forgotten, so I kind of like it too. So yeah, let's talk about that in the comments below. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.